Yeah.
Hi, this is Ashishar Bidekar, and welcome to my podcast, The ARB Show. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Dr. Pavan. Pavan is an innovation evangelist by profession and a teacher by passion. He is the founder of Inflexion Point, which offers programs in design, innovation, and leadership. He has conducted over 550 workshops with 170 organizations in over 5 countries. He is the author of the national bestseller, Designing Your Thinking, published by Penguin in 2020. This book was shortlisted for the 2021 BBLF CK Prahlad Best Business Book Award. Apart from being an adjunct faculty at ISB Hyderabad and IM Bangalore, Pavan is a columnist at Mint, Your Story, Inc. 42, and others. His monthly newsletter, Inflexion Point, reaches over 20K enthusiasts across the world. Pavan was the only Indian to be shortlisted for the prestigious FT and McKinsey Brackenmower Award for Best Business Book of the Year 2016. He has been invited 5 times to speak at the TEDx and is featured as one of the 100 digital influencers of 2020 by Your Story. Pavan is a gold medalist from MBM Engineering College, Jodhpur, and did his PG DIE from IIM Mumbai. He finished his doctoral studies from IIM Bangalore in the domain of innovation management. He is passionate about fitness, spirituality, guitar, chess, reading, and writing. Over to you, Dr. Pavan, and look forward to your vision and understanding and hearing from you on top 5 trends in innovation management. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Ashish, appreciate that highly. So, as far as innovation is concerned, the major movement which I'm realizing lately is the whole concept of embracing startup culture. Now, what most large enterprises are realizing is that their size has reached to some sort of a logical limit. And beyond that, they can't really innovate in a substantial fashion. Most of the improvement that they can bring about is more marginal improvement. So how do they bring a culture of innovation and get that startup ethos in terms of the agility? That's one major trend. And one way of doing is to acquire a startup. But then again, acquisition doesn't help, because unless you are embracing the culture of a startup, you are again killing the startup culture in the process of acquisition. That's one major trend. The second thing is about intrapreneurship. Intrapreneurship means that how do you bring people who have an entrepreneurial bent of mind into your organizational context? That is what's meant by intrapreneurship. And now this is important because then again you are okay to look at some unconventional talent. For example, you are okay to hire failed entrepreneurs, for instance. People have been very susceptible to and suspicious of hiring people who have failed in life, but hiring a failed entrepreneur is something which is now we are realizing it can be very useful to the organization, because whether the guy is a failed entrepreneur or a successful corporate, you can never predetermine how much time they'll be spending with your company. They can resign at any point of time. The second major trend. The third trend, and I'll leave it to 3, not 5. I think 3 is good. So first is the startup, embracing the startup culture. Second is the whole aspect of entrepreneurship. And the third aspect is the concept where companies are opening up the innovation pipeline significantly to collaboration. So what we call as open innovation, where we're looking at companies going and talking to academic institutions, other organizations, their partners, suppliers, customers, even startups at times. And they are saying that, okay, the idea can come from anywhere. The IP can come from anywhere. We can collaborate on the IP. And instead of trying to do everything end to end by itself, having very big R&D budgets, now they are much more open to embracing new possibilities. So these are 3 trends which I can identify right now. You are on mute.
Sorry,
Ashish.
I was on mute. Sorry. So all these
Yeah.
3 are very key points. So coming on the first point of startup engagement, so one of the challenges which let me talk from both sides of the side, from a startup side and as well as a big or a established company's perspective. So from a startup's perspective, one of the big challenges and the big feedback which one gets is that all these established companies many times have a innovation circus, right? They want to look innovative, so they will have a program, but nothing actually comes out of it. So typically the matrices are okay, we have a hackathon or we have a code camp and we invited 15 startups who presented, and yes, now we are innovative. But many of the startups say that it doesn't really go beyond the initial pilot phase. There are very few examples wherein it actually becomes a part of their business operations or a business thing, because again, in any big organization, things are so well embedded, right? And you have got cliches, you have got internal politics, etc. So that gets lost. So how does from both sides, how do companies prevent such kind of things, so that their innovation programs or the startup engagement programs are not seen as a innovation circus, but it really, they mean what they want to say out there. And secondly, for a startup perspective, how would you advise that what kind of programs should startups really engage, and what should be the key matrices they should look out for in such a kind of a corporate startup engagement program, maybe?
That's a good question. In fact, the choice of word corporate circle is quite interesting, because many times it just remains what you just said. So the first thing is that companies should not solicit ideas without problems. So instead of coming up with the idea bank, the good thing is to come up with a problem bank, because many times companies are not very clear what are they soliciting ideas for. So unless I have a very solid reason for soliciting ideas in the form of a problem bank, that's a very, very good starting point. So that is the first thing. The second thing is it has to be slightly more transparent. Once I am a startup or even an employee of an organization, I have submitted my idea, I need to have a clarity in terms of what happens next. It cannot be a situation where it's like a black hole or a black box for a viewer. If I'm submitting an idea, I need to know what is the fate of my idea. Are they accepting it, not accepting it? Should I go elsewhere? So that's as far as the organization is concerned, a problem bank and giving more visibility instead of falling for the trap of making it much more consistent. Okay. Now, from a startup perspective, they need to be selective about why are they participating in such places. Is it about networking? Is it about getting some mileage out of it, or do they have something substantial? So I would rather have a startup focus more on their intellectual property development instead of network development, because once you have a solid intellectual property, the world will come to you. There is no point in attending all these pitch events, hackathons, etc., because you're just diluting your intellectual property by telling it over and over again, and there is hardly any merit in it. On the contrary, as the founding team, if you are more serious about it, you would rather sit down and develop something which is much more substantial. So instead of meeting investors, it's a good idea to meet customers. So that is what I would suggest as a disciplined approach.
Got it. That's very nice. Another thing which, when you said it also, I was just reflecting. Many times, what startups complain that there is no budget, right? For example, if startup publishes an idea to a startup engagement program, and if the pitch given to the startup says, yes, your startup idea or your product would be integrated into our business, and we would be giving some kind of a commercial value pilot to you, that does not happen. So that's another thing probably which companies should be upfront, that okay, when we say a commercial project, this is the this is the value, and it should be backed internally end to end, right from the commercial team to the to everyone, all the internal stakeholders. So that's great. Coming to your second observation on entrepreneurship, and that's really a nice way to put things, that unless you learn to fail, you can't improve, right? Or you can't try something new, because as many people say, the fear of failures is a big hurdle, right, to try something new. And someone who's come from a startup role and kind of is embedded into the organization becomes can become a good change agent. On the second point, again, it is related with culture, because as you mentioned, if a big company acquires a startup, that really doesn't help, right? Because if the culture is gone, then there's no great value which the company can get. So from this entrepreneur role or entrepreneur function within a large organization, what are the kind of tips you would give to big companies as to what are the things they should be doing and not doing when they are supposed to have this entrepreneurial function within the company?
Yeah, so it is more to do with the individual than the organization. What type of people are suitable to be entrepreneurs at this first place? Okay. And there are three attributes that I would like to identify. The first attribute is that the person should be very, very good at sales. There is no way you can be an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur unless you have a sales skill. You have to close the deal. And many people think that sales is not my job. I'm here to develop something. I'll not be really getting into sales because they think that sales is a dirty word. Why should I get my hands dirty? So unless you have the capacity of selling, you can't be an entrepreneur. Okay, because you're selling a dream to an investor, you are selling a career to an employee, you're selling some returns to your stakeholders, etc. So I think you have to be a good salesperson. The second thing is the person should be really, really opportunistic, in the sense that instead of somebody telling him or her exactly what needs to be done, that person should be willing to take a stab at what are the various possibilities that are available to him or her, and then going ahead and trying to figure out what can be made. Because if things are so apparent at the first place, nobody needs such people. They are required when there's a lot of haziness. So instead of taking orders or waiting for the orders, they need to be proactive and sort of take a stab at things when they are little unclear. And the third aspect of such people is discipline. Because against an employee who is told by the supervisors that this is to be done now and this is to be not done, an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur is pretty much proactive. They are not supposed to be told, and even if they are told, it's not necessarily a good gospel. So what is required is they need to have the mind of their own. They need to be able to take a bit of risk in their life and career and not trying to play safe. From an organization standpoint, what is useful is to really create a conducive environment for such people to flourish. For example, the matrices. How do you measure the performance of such people? Should you measure them on the same yardstick as a regular employee? Now, these are very tough questions to answer. And unless an organization has figured out a mechanism of incentivizing them, measuring them, promoting their risk-taking appetite, this will again become a lip service, something that you call as innovation circus. So it needs the entire planning.
Got it. Yeah. So would you say that, this chief innovation officer or whoever is this entrepreneur who has come out from the startup ecosystem and is supposed to be embedded into this corporate culture, where should he be fitted? So should he be a part of the CEO's office, or should he be reporting to the CIO, or there should be a new function, CXO role created for him? And what would be the organization structure for such a kind of a role? Your thoughts?
It's a good question again. The thing is, if the person is in the CEO's office, then it might be a slightly elitist model. The people by and large will start thinking that he's a CEO's man. So they will be more envious of that character than inspirational. So that is not a great model. However, what works is that such entrepreneurs have to be embedded in each and every function in a grounds up model. Instead of being deputed from the top down, like a parachuted into a certain role, they have to come organically. So if I'm the marketing function, if I'm the HR function, and I see somebody having an entrepreneurial streak in my company, then I can identify him or her as an entrepreneur in residence. And that is how such people will be, wellspring of such people will come from bottom up rather than top down. And this has to be done in a distributed fashion, because if it is centralized, then once again, the organizational culture doesn't move. It becomes a very isolated elitist function. I don't want it to be limited to R&D. That's the most usual suspect. But because innovation can happen in every function, it's not an R&D function. I can have innovation happening in HR, marketing, finance, sales, wherever. So such people, if they come organically out of their self-interest, and then enable them to look at their penchant, that is a suitable model.
Excellent. So essentially what you're advocating is from all the specific functional heads like marketing, sales, HR, etc., the leadership should kind of earmark and ensure that there is at least one person who is come from a startup or from the non-corporate world, and one of his key KRAs is to deliver on innovation or or restructuring or transformation, whatever you might say. And once you have an adequate number of people across in all functions, automatically, things would start changing, because now you have a wider, bottoms up distributed, kind of reach. That's very, very pertinent, and I can see why this would has a better chance of working than the CEO's office role, as you mentioned. Because another problem in such areas is, again, because all of this is very fancy, and fancy words like strategy, transformation, etc., are favorite words of a CEO, right? And he would kind of again, going back to the term of corporate circus, saying that, hey, you know what, XYZ company has announced a new transformation 2.0, and it will have a lot of entrepreneurial focus, right? And we are appointing XYZ as the chief disruptor, etc., etc. And now the CEO thinks that, okay, now my work is done, I've already announced, market has picked it up, now I can focus on regular work. But if the necessary framework for delivering or transformation is not there across the organization, as you rightly mentioned, again, come 1 year, 2 years, this guy will get frustrated, and then it's back to square one. So very relevant point. Essentially, think of from a distributed perspective. Coming to the open innovation play, that is something which we see in many cases. And just stepping aside, just making an analogous comment, if you look at many of the technology platforms, right, wherein you have exposed the capability of a platform via APIs, that is in a way a very rudimentary form of open innovation, because you are co-creating. So any specific, again, do's and don'ts when you talk of open innovation? What are the kind of pitfalls which you have seen, or what are the kind of good success stories you have seen with open innovation?
Yeah, so as far as open innovation is concerned, the company needs to be clear about what do they want to be open about and what do they want to be remaining close to. So I can be open about talent, I can be open about ideas, or I can be open about funds. So these are 3 dimensions of innovation: talent, okay, funds, and ideas. And I can be close on any or one of these dimensions. Now, one of the sticky issues in open innovation is value appropriation. So for example, I take somebody else's idea and I commercialize the idea to the market and I make profits. How much should the person who had the original idea should get out of that entire profit? Okay, who owns the intellectual property? The one who has the idea or the one who executes the idea, etc., etc. So some of these things are laid out very clearly upfront, which is not always easy, because I do not know how much worth something is unless I have really worked on it. And the timing and right sales channel, competitive positioning, all of these really come into the play. So 2 things. The first is being clear about the intellectual property, and being clear also about what is it that you are willing to be open and what is it that you want to keep close to your chest. Because we have both these examples. If I look at innovation at Apple has always been vertically very closed. Apple has not been a big proponent of open innovation. On the contrary, if you look at something like Google has been very open in terms of what its innovation agenda is and the whole approach that they take. And both are equally successful. I can't say one versus another. But going forward, we will have fewer and fewer examples like Apple. So Apple will be more of an exception than norm. And we'll have a lot more examples of companies which are opening up. For example, Netflix. So when Netflix had to improve its algorithm accuracy for predicting the movies, its own set of designers and programmers could not make much of a headway. So it very famously opened up the entire code to people at large, the entire database, and it threw a challenge that anybody who improves its existing accuracy by more than 1% will get a cash award of $1 million. And people did work out with that Netflix database to improve the prediction accuracy. So I think even when you have some brightest engineers working with you, please be assured that the greatest talent is not with you, the greatest talent is outside of your company. And if you can have the right mechanism and the right incentive models to make them participate, you can really tap into that talent. But it has to be designed very, very well.
Got it.
So that is the catch.
Excellent. So here, when you talked of innovation, and we talked of 3 kind of pillars of innovation, if I were to use the term, how important is culture? And when I say culture, it is to do with the nation's culture, So, for example, innovation in India versus say innovation in Japan, right, is different, or innovation in Israel is different. So when companies, maybe Indian companies which wants to go global, or vice versa, wherein multinational companies entering India, how do you overcome the kind of cross-cultural nuances or cross-cultural barriers, and what are the kind of pitfalls which could kind of present themselves in this journey? What are your thoughts?
So the first thing is that we should not talk so much about culture. It's not the culture that matters, it is the climate. Okay, it's not the culture. For example, I'm sitting right now in Bangalore. Now, off late it was pretty hot, but the room in which I'm sitting is air conditioned. So I have not changed the weather of Bangalore. What I've changed is the climate of my room. Which means for an organization to be innovative, I don't really have to change the culture of this country. That's an unnecessary target that you have taken for yourself. What you need to do is to change the local climate of my company, which is very much in my control. Now, even though we talk about America being such an innovative country, but even America has not managed to create a second Silicon Valley. In the last so many years, they haven't managed to replicate the success of Silicon Valley elsewhere. Israel, you spoke about, hasn't managed to create the same magic that they have in Tel Aviv anywhere else. So what really stands out is that as an organization, I can choose to make some tough decisions, wherein I'm isolating my organization from rest of the culture of my country and producing excellence. Because for every Toyota which is there in Japan, which has perfected lean, perfected continuous improvement, there are a lot of other Japanese companies which are nowhere close to that level of efficiency and accuracy. So it's not very much a Japanese culture, but it is a Toyota culture. So same applies to organizations. So I think if as an organization I can maintain high standards in terms of how do I manage intellectual property, how do I hire and train people, what kind of incentive mechanisms I have for people to be creative, I don't think the country in which you're operating can be a big dampener. You can really isolate that.
All right. But do you see any barriers when it comes to, say, interpersonal relationship, when you're talking of across various countries, right? In a distributed global setting. For example, you've got a project team of Indians, Japanese, Americans, Germans, right? And now you're expecting them to be innovative, right? So are there any specific challenges which might come as a result of the organization?
Yeah, so I think as compared to the Germans and Japanese, as Indians, we are not very thorough in terms of problem solving. We are not very disciplined. I think we don't tend to spend a lot of time with the problem. We have a tendency of jumping to the solution, and that to our pet solution. But these things can be trained. What I'm trying to suggest to you is that Bosch, which is a German company, the employees of Bosch will be more Bosch-like than India-like, even though they are based out of Bangalore. And that's something I've seen. So if a company has a very, very regimented mechanism of inculcating some of these practices on how to do problem solving, how to do root cause analysis, I think the country level barriers can be overcome. So as a result, you will have a common language, even though you may be coming from different nationalities. Okay. And that is where a strong company culture can overcome these natural biases. It's possible.
Got it. So this is really great. Again, it comes to the whole point of culture, which you mentioned, right? Because culture is the kind of the energy or the fuel for making this happen. So in your research and in your studies, any good use cases or any good case studies which you can share where companies have got their innovation management right, and similarly any cautionary tales wherein innovation management programs of companies where really they started with all earnest, but it really was a flop?
I wouldn't be able to recollect any flop right now off the hand, but one of the very good success stories has been there of Tata Group. So Tata Group started somewhere in 2005 this program called Tata Innovista, and the whole idea was to celebrate innovation. But lately they added some very interesting features to Innovista, such as Innometer, which talks about the innovation performance of various Tata Group companies and the projects therein. And more interestingly, this whole notion called Dare to Try Award. So Tata Group is arguably one of the rare organizations in India which has made it a routine to felicitate failed innovations. And lately, what we have seen is that the companies, the group companies and the projects that apply for Dare to Try award is much more than those who apply for innovations which succeeded. So by having an award, institutionalizing an award which tolerates failure, what we have done is to send a signal that it is okay to fail. I'm legitimizing genuine attempts, and which is, I think, is a very, very big thing. That is one fantastic success story that we have in India. Similarly, we have had quite a few case studies on companies embracing design thinking. Now, some of the companies have not really gone the distance. For example, I can now talk about Big Bazaar. So Big Bazaar was very big on design thinking, but because of their perhaps lack of discipline of managing the current establishment, they could not really go ahead and do some wonderful stuff. So if you read Kishore Biyani's book, It Happened in India, he talks in length about what kind of investment that they're doing in design thinking, user centricity, consumer behavior, but somehow they could not put these things together. So these are the two examples that comes to my mind right now.
Any international examples which you would like to share?
In terms of innovation, I guess under Indra Nui, PepsiCo did some wonderful job in terms of innovation, because PepsiCo's portfolio massively was on high sugar, high fat content kind of foods, predominantly chips and cold drinks. But when she became the CEO somewhere in 2005 or 6, she really worked hard towards swinging the pendulum in the direction of more healthy choices given to people, either through acquisitions of brands like Tropicana and Quaker Oats, or by coming up with their in-house products and R&D. And she had a very unique move where she brought in the head of design from 3M and the head of R&D from a pharmaceutical company called Takeda. It's a Japanese pharmaceutical company. So together, these people really gave a lot of boost to R&D driven product development at Frito-Lay's PepsiCo. And consequently, over the period of time, the portfolio changed radically, both in terms of water consumption, in terms of the parameters on greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the kind of product choices that is offered to them in India. And no doubt, PepsiCo has bounced very handsomely in India, where people are generally very conscious about their eating habits. That's one thing. Now, globally also, I guess 3M did a very fantastic job in terms of bouncing back, because for the longest time, 3M was the poster child of innovation. But towards the turn of the century, they went big on Six Sigma, which somehow backfired, but they have got their mojo back. So these are two examples which I can think of readily, where they have gone ahead and made some very serious progress on. Amazon, of course, is another great example, because under the leadership of Jeff Bezos, Amazon has really gone ahead and embraced the whole idea of customer centricity and inventing on behalf of customer. So I think we have some amazing examples, and these companies are doing pretty well because of the commitment that they have made on innovation. For example, as we're talking right now, the highest R&D intensity of any company in the world is that of Amazon. Amazon spends close to about $24 billion per year on R&D. Now, most of these R&D is not visible to you and me as a consumer of the brand, but I think a lot goes into the invisible side in terms of how are they managing the warehouses, how are they managing data, shipment, carbon footprint, and so these are some of the examples that come to my mind.
Excellent. Thanks, Pavan. This gives a great perspective. And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. Do subscribe, share, and like this podcast. Consider giving the podcast a 5-star rating if you like the content. Bye for now. Talk to you soon.